Before it was candy and costumes and plastic skeletons and pumpkins, Halloween was fear and death. Every year, on a single night at the edge of autumn, they built fires so high, painting the hills orange, hoping to scare off anything that was lurking in the shadows. That night was called Samhain. Long ago, across the rolling hills, forests, and stone, the Celts, in now what is Scotland, Ireland, and parts of Wales, lived according to a different calendar than ours. Their year was divided not by months, but by seasons, and the land and its gifts. One of the 4 great festivals was called Samhain. It happened at the end of harvest, when autumn's dying fires gave way to winter's cold. The cattle were brought down from summer pastures, the days were shorter, the crops either stored or gone. It was a liminal time. Everything that had been growing was now at risk. The Celts believed this time to be dangerous. They believed that from sunset on what we call October 31st to sunrise on November 1st, the barrier between the living and the other world, that the realm of spirits, ancestors, fairies, and other worldly powers was thin. Spirits walked, and the veil between worlds was open. To cope with this, they built huge community fires, the ancient texts suggesting that fire was cleansing, protective, used to keep evil spirits at bay, to purify and to guide the souls. Families would extinguish their fires and then rekindle them with the sacred bonfires. They wore masks and animal skin to disguise themselves and protect themselves from spirits. Their thoughts being that if a spirit came too close, maybe it would mistake them for one of its own. They offered food, drink, and animals as offerings and sacrifices to gods, spirits, and ancestors, to ensure protection throughout the harsh winter. People also believed that around this time, people got clearer visions. Myths from Irish lore mention encounters with the other world, but over centuries, these practices drifted. But the core remained: fire, harvest, death, and the supernatural. The turning from life to death, summer to winter, and light to dark. When the Romans conquered the Celtic territories around the 1st century, they brought their own festivals with them. 2 in particular influenced Samhain traditions. One was Feralia, a Roman commemoration of the dead. Late October was also a time when Romans remembered the deceased. Another was a festival for Pomona, a goddess of the fruit and the trees. Her symbol was the apple. So, some of the apple traditions that we have during Halloween, such as bobbing for apples, likely traces back to that. So then, the old pagan rites, the Roman traditions, and the folk tales all came together. By the Middle Ages, Christianity was spreading through Celtic lands. The church often tolerated pagan traditions, but only if it was reinterpreted under Christian ideas. In the 7th century, Pope Boniface IV designated May 13th to be All Martyrs' Day. Later, Pope Gregory III moved All Saints' Day to November 1st. Thus, October 31st became All Hallows' Eve. And then over time, All Hallows' Eve turned into Halloween. Which, I didn't research this, but it would be really funny if, because Samhain and then Hallows' Eve is like Halloween, you know what I mean? Like, what if I bet they just smushed those together. All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, November 2nd, followed after All Hallows' Eve, giving the church time to pray for saints. So, with Christianity and the church getting involved in these traditions, it often changed the traditions to something more similar to what we know today. The spirits and otherworldly fears would be reframed. Souls rather than ghosts, saints rather than gods, and prayers rather than sacrifice. But 2 practices specifically illustrate the change of tradition quite deeply. In medieval England, children and the poor would go door to door during All Hallowtide, begging for soul cakes. They promised to pray for the souls of the dead in exchange. The cakes were small, round, and sometimes cross-shaped, often spiced and dotted with raisins. The prayers were for the dead in purgatory, and this custom persisted for centuries. Also during these times, other customs started to arise that we could still recognize to this day, such as lanterns being carved from turnips. Also, what I mentioned before, but this was already a tradition in Samhain to hide in a mask to try to hide from the spirits. So much of Halloween's identity, the disguises, the lanterns, even the idea of knocking on a stranger's door, all come from this fusion between pagan and Christian rituals. In the church's eyes, the night of October 31st was meant to prepare the faithful for holy remembrance. And for pagans, it remained a ritual for summer to end and for winter to begin, in the night where the veil between both worlds was its thinnest. By the 1800s, Halloween had traveled far from its Celtic roots. Europe was industrializing, and cities were swelling, and millions of people, especially from Ireland and Scotland, were packing their beliefs and boarding ships to the New World. When some arrived in America, they brought Samhain's Old Fire and All Hallows' Eve tradition with them. But America was a mix of many faiths, less connected to old rituals and more connected to community needs. Around this time in New England, Halloween was not broadly celebrated because of strict Protestant belief systems. In southern colonies and in some Irish and Scottish immigrants, some of the customs still existed. The 19th century brought a big wave of immigration from Ireland because of the potato famine in the 1840s. Before trick-or-treat, many communities had play parties, where they hosted harvest events, fortune-telling, divination, and going to each other's houses to tell ghost stories. In the late 19th century and early 20th century, with mass printing, magazines, and postcards, costuming became more possible. Decorations, masks, and costumes were all being produced commercially. By the 1920s and early 30s, children began going door to door asking for treats in costume. It was initially seen as controversial in some areas. After World War II and after some suburbanization, the trick-or-treating tradition became widely accepted. And by the 1950s, it was cemented into American culture. Another interesting thing to me is superstitions. As Halloween evolved from folklore and fear, a whole network of superstitions tangled itself around it. The most interesting to me being the 3 witches, black cats, and the number 13. Although it may not be directly involved with the creation of Halloween, it often lives under the same shadow of superstition. Today, it's practically the brand of bad luck. The missing floor of hotels, the seat skipped on airplanes. But originally, the number 13 wasn't unlucky at all. And in fact, in many ancient societies, it was often considered sacred. It represents cycles, rebirth, and feminine power. But when patriarchal systems and Christian beliefs, anything tied to the lunar or divine femininity was deemed dark. The sacred became suspicious. Women became witches, and 13, once a number of power, became a number to fear. And this is the same rewriting that made black cats such a bad omen. In early Celtic lore, black cats weren't seen as evil. They were guardians of the other world, creatures that could move between the living and the dead. But later, during the height of the witch trial in medieval Europe, the image of a witch and her cat often became inseparable. Cats were often seen as familiars, supernatural companions that helped witches perform dark magic. Some even believing that witches could transform into black cats to slip away. Pope Gregory IX in the 13th century declared that black cats were agents of the devil, and people took that literally, and unfortunately they slaughtered thousands of them. And ironically, this actually helped the plague spread, because beforehand, cats had kept the rat population in check. So without cats, today Halloween is a global event. In Japan, thousands of people crowd the streets of Shibuya in elaborate costumes. In Mexico, Dia de Muertos is the Day of the Dead, and they honor their ancestors with flowers and altars and celebrations, where again they believe that the veil between worlds is very thin. And in Europe, children still light candles and carve pumpkins just as their ancestors did 1,000 years ago. The Celts built fires to protect themselves from the dark. Today we carve pumpkins and light candles inside of them. After 2,000 years, through faith, fear, and film, the night still belongs to us, a night to be weary of the face of death, and to remember that even darkness needs a little light. Anyways, hi, I'm Isabella, and thank you for listening and joining me today. I hope you loved today's video. I really loved making this video. It was so much fun. It was so interesting to see where all these traditions came from and just how far they've traveled. Like, people in the first century were believing in Samhain, and today it's Halloween, but it's still carried this far. Anyways, if you liked today's video, you should hit that like button because it really helps me out. And if you had fun this time, you should subscribe because I guarantee you'll have fun next time because I do post every other Monday. Anyways, love you, great to see you, and I will see you next time. Bye!